All right. I'm going to be talking about something that's going to be very helpful to everyone tonight. A message that you could use in your everyday life. Everything that you say and everything that you do. Because how many tonight deal with temptation?
Everybody.
I mean, on a daily basis, am I right?
Right.
I mean, we're all tempted by something. We're all tempted in one way or another. And, so this is a very helpful sermon. I've just felt so oppressed this evening because I know that this message is like a key to unlock a lock on everybody's chains. And if I'm stumbling and mumbling around and don't get the word out right, then if the enemy's out there to confuse everybody, then the enemy's won. So I know that God wants to use this message and use His Word to help free people tonight, to help equip people for when they are faced with temptation, they know how to face it head on and to conquer it. Because in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13, we're going to start there. We're not going to hang around there very long. But in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13, and many of us know this verse, and many of us has read this verse, it says, "No temptation has come upon you except what is common to humanity." So there's another passage in Hebrews that talks about Yeshua, talks about Jesus, how He was tempted in every point as we are, yet without sin. In other words, He never succumbed to temptation. Jesus was tempted in every single aspect and way that a human being can be tempted. So He has walked in our shoes. He knows what we feel. He knows what we're going through. He knows what we're dealing with. And it says here, no temptation has come unto you except what is common to humanity. None of us can say, "Oh, nobody knows what I'm going through. Nobody could ever, I'm tempted in such a way that nobody can imagine." Bullcrap. You're nobody special. Everybody has been tempted. And everybody has experienced temptation to various degrees. No temptation has come upon you except what is common to humanity. But God is faithful. God is faithful. Amen. God wants me to be faithful, but He knows that I'm not always going to be faithful. Amen. When God made a covenant with Abraham, and He made a covenant between the parts, there was all these animals that were split right down the middle, and there was a little bloody aisleway that was made. And two people making such a covenant had to walk through those pieces. And by walking through those pieces, they were saying, what happened to these animals may it happen to me if I don't keep my end of the bargain. So when God made this covenant with Abraham, guess what? Abraham fell asleep. He didn't walk through the parts. Because God knew that Abraham couldn't keep up his end of the deal. Couldn't keep up his end of the bargain. But it said that there was a flame that passed through that aisleway of blood between those animals. And that was God's manifest presence. He's saying, I'm going to keep my end of the bargain even though I know, Abraham, you can't. And that's okay. Because I'm a faithful God and I'm going to keep my promises. And it says, God is faithful. He will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able. Amen. So if you succumb to temptation, guess what? It's your fault. It's my fault. It's not God's fault. Nobody's fault but your own. Amen. We live in such a day where people don't want to fess up to their own issues. They don't want to own up to their own mistakes and their own issues. They want to say, and even the doctors are on this kick. They're like, "Oh, well, you can't help the way you are. Your parents screwed you up. It's the way you were raised. It's your parents' fault." Bull crap. Own up to your faults, own up to your issues, own up to your failures, own up to your mistakes. Because nobody's twisting your arm, making you shoot up with a needle. Nobody's twisting your arm, making you jump in bed with somebody that's not your spouse. Nobody's putting a gun to your head and telling you to smoke dope. It's not happening, right? So whatever happens, you got to make that decision. You got to make that choice. When the ball's in your court, you got to know what to do. You can't say, "Oh, well, I screwed up and the devil made me do it." Yeah, Eve tried that and it didn't work. And after Eve said, "The devil made me do it," Adam said, "No, it's my wife that made me do it." It's that passing the buck. Adam and Eve didn't want to own up to their sin and didn't want to own up to their own mistake. It was their problem, their fault. When true deliverance and true healing begins is when you say, "Yeah, man, I totally screwed up. It's my mistake. It's my fault. I did it. Nobody's fault but my own." Man, there will be a weight that will be lifted off your shoulders. because you'll realize, man, I'm free. I'm not carrying this around anymore because I confessed it. It no longer has a hold on me, no longer has chains on me. Because I confessed it, I admitted to it, I'm free. Amen. But God is faithful. He will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able. So whatever temptation that you're facing, God knows you can overcome it. All you got to do is look for the exit door. That's your job. He says, but when the temptation, He will provide a way out so that you may be able to bear it. Think back to Joseph, right? He was framed for a crime he didn't commit. He was the head slave in his master's household, and his master's wife had the hots for him. And whenever she had the opportunity, she's like, "Go to bed with me. You know, I'm a beautiful, powerful woman. I can make life really good for you here. Just go to bed with me. Nobody ever has to know. It'll be our little secret, right?" No, you know. I mean, it's tempting for a young man, right? To get laid for free. I'm just going to put it out there in the street vernacular. What guy doesn't want to pass that up? Right? Oh, it's a beautiful woman, powerful woman. I'll have something on my master. You know, he can't control me, and it's my way of rebellion, my way of expressing myself. Plus, if I want to feel good. But Joseph says, I can't sin against God, and I can't sin against my master. And each day he said, no. Finally, it was just him and her in the house, all by themselves. Nobody else was around. She grabbed onto his clothing. She says, "Sleep with me." And he's like, no. And he slipped right out of his coat. And he ran and left the coat in her hand. God provided Joseph a way of escape. It was to slip out of that coat and run. It got him in trouble. It landed him in the dungeon for a while. But even in the dungeon, God blessed him. And he rose to power in the dungeon. But he went from the dungeon to second command of Egypt. All because he was faithful to God, no matter what the consequences, no matter what happened. He wasn't going to sin. He wasn't going to let God down. He wasn't going to sin against his master. So it says, but with the temptation, He will also provide a way out. So look for the exit door when you're tempted. Amen. That you may be able to bear it. So I want to read you a very sad story. In 2 Samuel chapter 13. It's one of the most saddest stories. And it's about temptation. Now, you can apply this story to any temptation, whether it be drugs, whether it be, stealing, whether it be gossiping, whatever. But this one is talking about lust. It's talking about sexual temptation. So, 2 Samuel chapter 13 says, "Some time passed, and David's son Absalom had a beautiful sister named Tamar." Now, first of all, understand that David had several wives, right? And with several wives, he had many children. So there was a lot of people in David's house who were brother and sister, but they were half-brother, half-sister. They had the same dad, different mom, right? And so they were brother and sister, but they kind of weren't, they didn't feel like brother and sister because they all lived in their own places and lived their own lives and things like that. But so it says, some time passed, and David's son Absalom had a beautiful sister named Tamar. And David's son Amnon was infatuated with her. So Amnon and Tamar were half-siblings. Tamar and Absalom had one mother, and Amnon had a totally different mother. They all had the same father, which was David. So Amnon was frustrated to the point of making himself sick over his sister Tamar because she was a virgin, but it seemed impossible to do anything to her. Man, every time Amnon seen Tamar, man, it got his libido going, right? He just had the hots for his sister. She was gorgeous, and he wanted her. He wanted to go to bed with her. And he made himself so sick because that's what he obsessed about. It's the only thing that consumed his thoughts. It's the only thing that he could think about. How could I get in bed with my sister? How could I, get in bed with my sister Tamar? And he made himself sick. Amnon had a friend named Jonadab, which was actually his cousin, right? Son of David's brother Shomeyr. So Jonadab and Amnon were cousins, right? And they were really good buddies. Jonadab was a very shrewd man, and he asked Amnon, why are you, the king's son, so miserable every morning? Won't you tell me? Amnon replied, oh, I'm in love with my sister Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister. Jonadab said to him, lie down in your bed and pretend that you're sick. And when your father comes and sees you, say to him, please let my sister Tamar come and give me something to eat. Let her prepare a meal in my presence so I can watch and eat from her hand. So Amnon lay down and pretended to be sick. He's like, hey, that's a great idea. You know, Amnon had this fairy tale concocted in his head. He's like, the reason I'm depressed, the reason that I'm frustrated, the reason that I'm mad is because I can't have my sister Tamar. And if I can only have my sister Tamar, that's going to solve all my problems. I'm going to be happy. I'm going to be fulfilled. I'm going to get what I want and I'm going to be satisfied. Right? Have you ever been hungry, but you really didn't know what you want? So you just go into the kitchen and go through the cupboards and you just grab this and that and start eating. You're like, nah, that's not it. No, you know, but nothing satisfies you. You can't find any food that satisfies you. That's just like sin. Sin says, hey, I'm going to make you happy. I'm going to give you what you want. I'm going to satisfy you. But you're always left hungry, wanting more, wanting something else because you're not satisfied. You're not fulfilled. Right? So it says, Amnon laid down and pretended to be sick. And when the king came to see him, Amnon said, please let my sister Tamar come and make me a couple cakes in my presence so I can eat from her hand. And of course, David was clueless. You know, he didn't think anything of it. So David sent word to Tamar at the palace, please go to your brother Amnon's house and prepare a meal for him. Then Tamar went to his house while Amnon was lying down. She took dough, kneaded it, made cakes in his presence, and baked them. She brought the pan and set it down in front of him, but he refused to eat. Amnon said, everyone, leave me! And everyone left him. Bring the meal to me to my bedroom, Amnon told Tamar, so I can eat from your hand. Tamar took the cakes that she'd made and went to her brother Amnon's bedroom. When she brought them to eat, for him to eat, he grabbed her and said, come, sleep with me, my sister. Don't do this, my brother, she cried. Don't disgrace me for such a thing. Such a thing should never be done in Israel. Don't commit this outrage. Where could I go without being humiliated? Where could I go from my humiliation? And you would be like one of the outrageous fools in Israel. Please speak to the king. He won't keep me from you. So, you know, Tamar's like, she said, no, I don't want to sleep with you. This isn't right. This isn't the right thing to do. If you really want me that bad, do it the right way. Go through the proper channels. Go to Father. He won't refuse you. He'll let you marry me, and then everything will be said and done. You'll get what you want. But no, he didn't want to go through the right channels. He wanted what he wanted, and he wanted it right now. He wasn't going to wait any longer. And when you feel driven to get something or driven to do something, that's not of God.
Amen. No.
The evil one drives you to do something, makes you feel like and think that you've got to do it or you're going to die. The Holy Spirit guides you. He will lead, guide, and direct you to do the right thing, to get what you need. You know, when we think of sin is an illegitimate way of fulfilling a legitimate need. That's one way we could look at sin. It's an illegitimate way of fulfilling a legitimate need. You know, why do people sleep with other people that aren't their spouses? Because they're lonely. Or because, you know, they have that natural, bent towards having sex that God has put within every single one of us. It's a healthy thing, and you can fulfill it in a holy way through matrimony. But there's an illegitimate way of doing that, and that's fornication and adultery and all that stuff, right? But that is a legitimate need that's within human. We are created and wired that way, right? So sin is an illegitimate way of fulfilling a legitimate need. So Tamar, tries to convince her brother not to do this thing, not to disgrace her, not to humiliate her, because she's going to be called a slut and a whore, and he's going to be called a fool and an idiot for what he did. He's going to have the whole kingdom mad at him. But he wasn't thinking. And when you're tempted, all you can think about is fulfilling that need. You don't think about the consequences. You don't think. When you get drunk, You don't think how you're hurting somebody else. How you could get in a car and get in an accident and affect somebody else's family that you don't even know. A lot of people say, well, I can do what I want. My sin's not bothering anybody else as long as I'm not hurting anybody else but myself. But your sin does hurt everybody else. Doesn't matter what your sin is. Your sin is going to affect somebody else. If you're addicted to pornography, your sin is going to affect your future spouse. Going to affect your kids. Getting drunk, it's going to affect those that you love the most. They're scared of you when you're drunk. Because either you're way super sappy and in love with everybody and everything, or you're angry and breaking and tossing and kicking everything. It's one extreme or the other, right? You know, or you're high as a kite because you're shooting up and you're talking crazy out of your head. You're scaring people. You're not just affecting yourself, you're affecting everybody else with your sin. Sin is very selfish. It's what I want, when I want it, how I want it, and I want it immediately, and I want it now. Because it makes me feel good. I don't care about anybody else. You know, we can go on and on about all that different stuff. So, it says, verse 14, but he refused to listen to her. And because he was stronger than she was, he disgraced her by raping her. So, now, this is the crazy part. You would think Amnon would sit back, put his hands behind his head, smoke a cigarette, and, was that as good for me as it was for you, babe? Oh, I feel so much better now. I'm so satisfied now. You would think that, right? Because he got what he wanted. But no, the opposite occurred. The opposite happened. Verse 15, verse 15. So Amnon hated Tamar with such an intensity that the hatred he hated her with was greater than the love he had loved her with. Get out of here, he said. No, she cried. Sending me away is much worse and a greater wrong than what you've done to me. But he refused to listen to her. Instead, he called to his servants who waited on him. Get this away from me. Throw her out and bolt the door behind her. Amnon's servants threw her out and bolted the door behind her. Now Tamar was wearing a long-sleeved garment because this is what the king's virgin daughters wore. So their clothing kind of revealed their political status, their royal status, and their sexual status. So it was a specific garment that virgins wore. Kind of like the Amish. You know that an Amish dude is married when he's got a beard. If an Amish guy doesn't have a beard, he's still single, right? Kind of the same thing. Wear a wedding band. Proof shows that I'm married. Well, a certain garment that the king's daughters wore shown that they were a virgin, that they weren't married. So this is what she did. Tamar put ashes on her head and tore the long-sleeved garment she was wearing. She put her hand on her head and went away crying. So that's a very sad story about sin. About how one person thought that sin was going to satisfy him, and it didn't satisfy him. He kept wanting more. Right? And when he got what he wanted, it didn't satisfy him like he thought it would. So, where does temptation begin? Temptation begins as a thought. Temptation begins in the mind. That's where it begins. And the Apostle Paul, Rav Shaul, tells us in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 2 through 6, it says, I beg you that when I am present, I will not need to be bold with the confidence by which I plan to challenge certain people who think we are behaving according to the flesh. For although we live in the flesh, we do not wage war according to the flesh, since the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but are powerful through God to the demolishing of strongholds. We demolish arguments and every proud thing that raises up against the knowledge of God, and we take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. And we are ready to punish any disobedience once obedience is complete. So it shows that temptation begins in the mind, because the Apostle Paul says that the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, not fleshly, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds, casting down imaginations of every high thing. Imaginations, those are in your mind. Casting down imaginations of every high thing that exalted itself against the knowledge of God. and taking every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ. So we've got to mind our thoughts. We've got to control our thoughts, control our thinking, take captive our thoughts, because thoughts are where temptations start being born. They start become manifest. They start showing themselves in our minds and in our thoughts. So a thought may seem innocent, but it creates neural pathways like a wheelbarrow path from the shed to the garden. So the more we think about a certain thing, the more solid it becomes in our mind. Like, we're all creatures of habit, right? Every single one of us has a routine when we get up in the morning. You know, we take a shower, brush our teeth, comb our hair, get dressed, and we do it without even thinking. Because we've done it day after day after day after day. It's become a routine that we don't even think about it. Right? That's neural pathways in your brain being solidified when you do things without thinking. Right? So it's the example is like, the more you think about something, it's like somebody who has a wheelbarrow, and they're taking the wheelbarrow from the shed to the garden. Let's say every day you go out to your shed, you put put a couple bags of mulch in there, you put your spade in there, and your shovel, and all these other tools, gloves and stuff like that, and you wheel that wheelbarrow with all the supplies out to the garden. Get on your hands and knees and you do your gardening thing for a couple hours. Every day you do that, you travel that same path. And that wheelbarrow goes across that path so much that it creates a rut. Right? And that rut gets deeper and deeper every day, every time that wheelbarrow passes that path. And then, it passes by so much that even if you wanted to make that wheelbarrow go somewhere else, it's not going to go anywhere else but in that little rut that you created. Because the rut is so deep, you can't, and the wheelbarrow is so heavy, you can't steer and pop that wheel out of that rut to make it go somewhere else. It's got to go in that direction. And that's just like a neural pathway. It's just like a thought that becomes routine, and a routine that becomes habit. Habits are hard to break, right? Mm-hmm. It's hard to break a routine that you've done for years and years and years, no matter what it is. And so that's the way it is with temptation, and that's the way it is with sin. The more you do a certain sin, the easier that sin becomes, and the harder it is to stop that particular sin, because you've created a neural pathway in your brain like a rut with a wheelbarrow, right? That's kind of the way it is. So now, thoughts in and of themselves aren't sinful. A lot of times I've had people come to me and they're scared. They've got this scared look on their face, and they just, they're on the verge of tears. I'm like, what's wrong? Well, I just had this evil thought. Okay, so you had an evil thought. Well, I'm going to go to hell, right? No. God's going to punish me, right? No, because thoughts aren't sinful. It's what you do with those thoughts which makes it sin or not. Because a thought doesn't always come from you. Thoughts come from one of three places, and we're going to explore that in just a second. But have you ever, when I was a young Christian, first got saved, I was reading my Bible one time, and a thought popped into my head. Piss on the Bible. I was disgusted with myself. I was like, oh my gosh, how could I ever think such a thing? Oh God, please forgive me for thinking that. But after a while, I realized it wasn't me, because I would never think something like that. Why would I be reading the Bible and think that as I'm reading the Bible? It makes no sense. It was an evil thought that popped into my head, that Satan threw into my head to throw me off, to get me scared. So a thought is not evil. It's what you do with that thought that makes it evil or not. It's what you do with that thought that makes it sin. So if you have a wild and crazy thought that pops into your head, what did I just read in 2 Corinthians? Take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. So I learned that when I had a crazy thought, spit on the Bible, rip up the Bible, piss on the Bible, I stopped and I was like, no, that thought didn't come from me. In the name of Jesus, I rebuke you, Satan, and I command you to leave, because that thought didn't come from me. I don't entertain that thought. I don't give credence to that thought. I don't give any validity to that thought. I command you to leave in Jesus' name. And I just cast that thought out. I take that thought captive to the obedience of Christ, because I know it didn't come from me. I know it wasn't of me. I know it was a thought that the devil wanted to put in my head to manipulate, play games with me, and try to get me to do something that I don't want to do. So a thought in and of itself isn't sinful. It's what we do with that thought. So I want to talk to you about where these thoughts come from. In Matthew, we get a good illustration. In Matthew chapter 16, starting at verse 13, It says, when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do you say that the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Well, some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, still others Jeremiah or one of the other prophets. But you," he asked them, "who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus responded, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father in heaven." Did you catch that? Do you see where I'm going with this? Jesus said, "But who do you say that I am?" And Peter pops up, "You're the Messiah, you're the Son of God." And basically, if I can paraphrase here, Jesus basically said, "Hey, you're blessed, Peter, because you didn't come to this conclusion on your own. This thought just didn't pop into your head. You didn't come up with this conclusion. You didn't come up with this thought. This thought didn't come from you. This revelation is not yours." It says, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you." You didn't think of it. Nobody came and whispered in your ear, "Hey, Peter, Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God." You know? No. It says, "But my Father in heaven revealed it to you." That was a thought that was downloaded into Peter's mind from God. That was a thought that directly came from God to Peter. So that's one place that thoughts can come from. Divine revelation, we call it, right? So, now let's jump to verse 21. And it says, "From then on, Jesus began to point out to his disciples that it was necessary for him to go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders, chief priests, the scribes, and to be killed and to be raised on the third day. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him." Could you imagine Peter rebuking the Messiah, rebuking the Lord? It says Peter rebuked him. He says, "Oh no, Lord, this will never happen to you." And Jesus turned and told Peter, he looked right at Peter and he said, "Get behind me, Satan." He looked Peter in the eye and told him that he's Satan. He said, "Get behind me, Satan." Now, Satan means the enemy. It just doesn't mean the devil with, the wicked devil with horns. Satan, the Hebrew word for Satan means adversary, means enemy. Hasatan. So Jesus Jesus turned and told Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me because you're not thinking about God's concerns, but human concerns." So we got the two same characters here, Jesus and Peter, right? The first time Peter had a thought, Jesus praised him and said, "Hey, Peter, God just gave you this thought. This thought didn't come from you. This was a divine thought." Here in this next passage, Jesus calls Peter Satan and says, "Get behind me. You don't want the things of God. You're concerned about the things of man." Right there, Jesus was telling Peter, that thought you just had that said, "Oh no, Lord, this can never happen to you." You didn't think of that. You didn't come up with that on your own. That was a satanic thought that popped into your head, that was planted into your head by the devil. Because the devil knows he doesn't want me to die. He doesn't want the end game of redemption. So on the one hand, Peter had a divine thought from God. And a couple verses later, Peter had a thought from Satan. So those are two places that thoughts can come from. Now the third place that a thought can come from is from yourself. Now here's an example of thoughts that come from yourself. "Gee, I'm awful hungry. I think I'm going to get me a bite to eat. Gee, I'm tired. I need to go lay down and go to sleep. Oh gosh, I gotta go pee." Those are thoughts that come from me. Those are instinctual thoughts. Those are thoughts that have to deal with my necessary needs. They're just everyday thoughts. Oh, hey, the sun went down. It's dark outside. Okay, that thought came from me. Right? So those are one of three places that your thoughts can come from. Either from God, from Satan, or from yourself. So whenever, you have a thought, think to yourself, is this a heavenly thought, a divine thought, a satanic thought, or is this just me? Because when you're tempted and you recognize that that thought is not you and didn't come from you, you'll know how to deal with that. You'll be able to rebuke that thought and take that thought captive to the obedience of Christ. Right? So, Matthew 5:28 says this. But I tell you, everyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. It's talking about a thought. But it goes beyond a thought. I can look at a woman and say, whoa, she's hot. Right? Because, I have my own ideals of what's pretty and what's beautiful. And I could just glance at a woman and say, whoa, and she could take me by surprise because she's so stunning. And I could just leave it right there and say, whoa, she's hot. And be done with it. But I think wow, she's hot. I wonder what she would look like in a bikini. Oh, there I just took that thought somewhere it shouldn't have gone. Right? I think, man, I wonder what it'd be like to date her. Boy, I wonder if she's good in the sack. Oh, that's when that thought has turned to sin. Just looking at her and saying, wow, she's hot, isn't a sinful thought. You're just admiring the beauty of something, right? But if I just left it there, that'd be one thing. But just to say, oh man, I wonder what she looks like in a bikini. Oh wow, she's got nice features, and started pointing out these particular features, right? That's when it becomes sin. Because Jesus said, but I tell you, everyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So that's one indication of how a thought can turn sinful in an instant. When you entertain that thought and take it a step further. Now, in this same passage, Jesus talks about hatred. Being mad at somebody and hating somebody, right? He's like, it's like committing murder. Now, the Bible also says, be angry and sin not. One time I came in here and I had on this shirt that I got from Africa, right? Aaron's playing guitar, and he's like, dude, you look like a rapper. I took offense to that. I'm like, man, I'm all about heavy metal. I don't look like a rapper. What are you talking about, man? And I got mad at him, right? Because he said that. He insulted me. He called me a rapper. I don't like rap. I like rock. I like metal. But if I would have just entertained that thought and just all that night said, gosh, man, I can't believe Aaron said that. If I can get my hands on him, I'd just choke right out of him. How dare he say something like that to me? Oh, he's talking about he hasn't had a bloody nose in years. Well, I'll give him a bloody nose. Right? And then that can go to an insane place and, I'm going to cut out his tongue for saying something like that. That's where I was angry. And being angry in an instant, that's human, right? Just being mad at him. But I immediately brushed that thought away. I'm like, oh, he didn't mean it like I thought, like I took it. He obviously didn't mean it like I took it, right? So it's like, okay, I'm going to show grace to the guy, and I'm going to forgive him this time. Next time I'll slap him. So, but if I hate, the hate can easily turn into murder. Because I'm imagining choking him. I'm imagining blooding his nose. I'm imagining cutting his tongue out. That's sinful because I'm imagining these sinful things in my mind. I'm taking that thought a step further into the realm of sin. Right? So that's when a thought becomes sinful. So if an evil thought pops into your mind, don't think that you've sinned because you've thought about it. But if you meditate on it, entertain it, and take it a step further, that's when it becomes sin. You have the power, once you recognize, oh, this is a dirty thought, I'm going to take control of it right now, take that thought captive to the obedience of Christ. I recognize, renounce, and rebuke this thought as coming from the devil. I rebuke it, I command it out of my mind in Jesus' name. You've won. You don't have to worry about that thought turning into something else. Right? So, James 1:15 says that when lust has conceived, it brings forth sin. And when sin, when it is finished, it brings forth death. I call this the spiritual version of LSD. Lust, sin, death. When lust has conceived, it gives birth to sin. So, that's why you have to control lust right when you realize it's happening. Because if you entertain lust, it'll gestate and give birth to sin. That lust will turn into action. That lustful thought will turn into action. And then when lust has conceived, it brings forth sin. When sin, when it is accomplished, when it is finished, when it is fully grown, it brings forth death. Because after you've sinned, you start hating yourself, you start regretting what you've done, and you're like, I can't believe I did this, and you feel guilty, you feel shameful. It brings a spiritual death in your heart. It just rips your heart out. So we got to keep that in mind. Sin will always take you further than you want to go, and will make you pay more than you're willing to afford, or than what you can afford. Right? Think about that. Sin will take you further than you want to go. Oh, I'm just gonna get on the internet and just look at a little bit of porn. It's not gonna hurt. I'm just gonna, it'll take you further than when you go. After you watch porn for a while, you're like, man, this don't do anything for me. I'm gonna go to a nudie bar. I'm gonna go to a strip joint. You're right there and you're seeing it there. And then, oh man, you get that same high that you got when you first got online looking at porn. And then all of a sudden that doesn't do anything for you. Same old, same as yesterday. Well, man, I think maybe I'm going to pay for a prostitute. That'll fix it. That'll satisfy me. See, at first you're just like, I'm just going to look at a little bit of porn. And then all of a sudden you're paying for a prostitute. It takes you further than you want to go, and it'll cost you more than you can afford. Somebody catches you looking at something you're not supposed to look at online, the worst that can happen is you're shamed, you're embarrassed. You get security on your internet so you can't look at that stuff anymore. And then your wife or girlfriend's mad at you for a little bit, and then things get fine. But a lot of it. But then, like if you take it further to that extreme, and you pay that prostitute, and you jump in bed and sleep with a prostitute, and then it comes out and you get found out. Well, guess what? Your wife's leaving you. She's taking the kids with you. You lose your job. You lose your friends. And if you're in ministry, hey, you've lost your ministry and you've lost your witness. You've ruined your reputation. It takes you further than you want to go and costs you more than you can afford. That's the way sin always is. Sin, temptation and lust, it's the God of that. The God of temptation never delivers. It always works with the law of diminishing returns. Right? So the more you give, the less you get back. Right? Okay, so we're going to stick with the lust issue. There, you get desensitized. Right? Example, before I went to Bible college, went in high school, you're around kids every day. Every other word's the F-bomb. They're cussing up a storm. So it's not nothing to hear a cuss word. It's not nothing to hear a cuss word on TV now. From the F word to the B word, whatever word you want it. You can hear it, right? When I went off to Bible college, I spent like a whole year not hearing a cuss word. Not hearing anybody say a swear word. And then all of a sudden, it's summer vacation, I go back home, and all of a sudden the first swear word I hear, I'm like, whoa! It's like, I couldn't believe it. I can't believe you said that! Because I was desensitized before I left for Bible college. Because I just heard it all the time. F-bomb this, F-bomb that, GD this, GD that. But when I went to Bible college, I didn't hear it. So I become sensitive again, right? And then I go back home in the summertime and I hear my first swear word from somebody. I'm like, whoa, it shocks me because I haven't heard it because I become sensitive to that again, right? So, anybody who's been addicted to alcohol or drugs, you know what I'm talking about. You know what it's like. You get high and it's all great. But then, okay, let's say that you shoot up once and you feel great. You shoot up a second time, not as good as the first time. Well, I'll just take a little bit more. Take a little bit more. Oh, yeah, okay, that's the high that I was looking for. And then you take another time, you're like, oh man, this isn't working. I need to up the dose. And you get a greater dosage, or you're taking more amounts of drugs to get that same high that you were expecting. Because you get desensitized to it. Your body gets numb to it. And you need something greater and more and higher to get that same high. But it's the law of diminishing returns. You give and give and give of yourself, but you don't get what you're expecting in return. And just like with Amnon, in the story of Amnon and Tamar, he thought, man, if I could just sleep with my sister, I'm going to have what I want, I'm going to be satisfied. He wasn't satisfied. He ended up hating her guts, kicking her out, humiliating her. The sin that he desired did not have the effect that he thought he was going to get. So whenever you're tempted and whenever sin comes into your life, just know that it's not going to be this fairy tale that you're imagining in your mind. It's not going to be the satisfaction that you think it's going to be. Right? So it's kind of like a goldfish. I heard this story. This is a true story. Read it in a book, so it's got to be true. Actually, it was a good book. Anyway, there was this guy who bought a goldfish as a pet for his daughter, and the little round goldfish bowl and stuff like that. And she took that goldfish everywhere with her. And one day they went to the swimming pool. And, oh, Daddy, I want to take my fish swimming with me. Well, honey, he can come swimming, but he has to stay in the bowl. Why can't I put him in the swimming pool? Because the swimming pool's not good for him. There's chemicals in the water that's bad for him, and he'll die, and if we get him in there, we won't be able to catch him, and all this kind of stuff. So, they set the fish bowl on the side of the pool, and they enjoyed. Wouldn't you know it, that fish jumped out of the bowl and into the pool. That fish was in that bowl probably thinking, man, that water looks awful good. That water looks awful refreshing. Hey, I'll have a lot more room in that pool than I have in this little bowl. I want to be where that little kid is. It's so much better on the other. I know it's better. The grass is greener on the other side. So the fish jumps out of the bowl and into the water. And of course, the fish is in the pool. You can't catch a goldfish in a swimming pool. And it wasn't too long until that goldfish went belly up. That temptation of that water for that fish caused its death. It jumped in the pool, thought it was getting what it wanted, thought that it would be happier, thought it would be freer, thought it would have a lot more room. And all of a sudden, the chemicals in that pool burned the lungs of that fish, the gills of that fish, and that fish died. And that's a perfect example of temptation, of giving in to temptation and what that does to your life. Right? 1 Corinthians, I'm going to turn back to 1 Corinthians, and we're going to close with that. 1 Corinthians 10:13. No temptation has come upon you except what is common to humanity. But God is faithful, and He will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able to bear. But with the temptation will also provide a way out, so that you may be able to bear it. So when it comes to temptation, you know what your temptations are. You know what sins you're attracted to. You've got to come up with a game plan to nip it in the bud before it happens. If it's porn, have an accountability partner. That always asks you, what have you been doing online? Where do you go online? Let me look at your internet history. Or have software put on your computer that won't let you go to those places. Or if you do go to those places, it'll send emails to your accountability partner to let you know where you've been.
Make one your wife.
Yeah, exactly. So that's one example, right? If it's alcohol, don't go to a bar. Don't go to a party where you know there's going to be booze if you are an alcoholic and you're tempted by it and you can't stay away from it. Burn the bridges, right? Burn the bridges that's going to allow you to cross over into that sin. Burn the bridges so you can't cross. Make it so that you won't be tempted. You've got to come up with a game plan. So like I said, an accountability partner might be the way to go. And burning a bridge, letting somebody know that you have this addiction or have this problem. There's so many people that have so many addictions and they're afraid to talk about their sins and talk about their addictions because they're afraid they're going to be judged. They're afraid that they're going to be condemned. But man, whenever somebody comes and confesses a sin to me, I'm like, hey man, I'm going to pray for you. And if you ever need me and you're ever tempted, why does AA work? And why does Alcoholics Anonymous work? And why do people get sponsors when they're trying to kick drugs? Because it's proven to work. Because these sponsors, they can get called on day or night, anytime. The phone's always by them. So if the person is tempted to shoot up, snort, smoke, toke, whatever, they can call that person and say, hey, I'm really struggling right now. It's like I'm so stressed out. I'm just wigging out. And like all I want, man, is to get my hands on some heroin. And then that person, that sponsor, can talk them down from the ledge or say, hey, I'll be right over in a minute. We're gonna go, right? Sometimes when I've been tempted, like for instance, the internet, been tempted by that, I just leave. I'll go to the gym, go exercise. I'll go out for a walk. I'll get out of that environment that's drawing me in. So those are you got to come up with a game plan to be able to overcome temptation and to beat temptation. Because God promised us that if we're tempted, He's going to provide a way out. In other words, look for the exit door. Act like it's a burning house and look for the exit. Because God will provide a way out. And if you succumb to that temptation and succumb to that sin, is it God's fault?
No.
Is it your mama's fault?
No.
Is your best friend's fault? Whose fault is it?
Mine.
Yeah, it's your fault. It's my fault. Because we're the one, we have a choice. Nobody's fault but our own, right? And if you do fall into temptation, don't beat yourself up over it. Because that's just as bad. Just say, hey man, I screwed up. I'm going to do better next time. God help me, right? Don't beat yourself up over it, because we all fall into sin. We all fall into temptation every now and again. It happens because we're human. We're not perfect, right? See, part of that temptation test is if you can forgive yourself. If you can forgive yourself and move on. If you ask God to forgive you, He promised He would. Hardest thing is to forgive yourself when you screw up like that, right? All right, so let's close in a word of prayer.
Abraham'sDescendants.com, getting back to the first century in a 21st century way.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to press the like button as well as the subscribe button if you haven't done so already, and the notification bell that'll let you know every time I make a new video. And don't forget to share this with a friend. Also, visit our website at Abraham'sDescendants.com. Thanks. Shalom.
Thanks for watching. Stay connected by subscribing to our other social media accounts and visiting our website at Abraham'sDescendants.com.